Awesome. I know something you've been talking about lately is the connection to discipline and freedom, which is something that previously you know maybe hidden from or walked away from because you didn't want to be tied down to something. So share with us what you've been enlightened by about these discoveries of late.
For sure, and all you have to do is look at a Navy SEAL or a martial artist to understand that discipline equals freedom, or a gymnast or an Olympic athlete or a highly educated lawyer or a doctor. They've spent the hours, the 10,000 hours or plus, in discipline, doing the things that they said they were going to do. And probably in the moment where they were getting up at 5 in the morning and training day in, day out, that discipline probably felt like prison. But at a certain point, it's almost like there's a tipping point where you have shown up for yourself and you have done what you said you were going to do on a consistent basis, and you're disciplined, where all of a sudden you break free and you're free because you have mastery in that field. But you can only get mastery over your body as a dancer or as a musician, mastery over your instrument, if you have the discipline and you put in the time. And eventually that equals freedom. Most people think of a morning routine or training at the gym not as freedom, but it is the gateway to freedom. It is a paradox. The more discipline you have, the more free you are. But it doesn't feel like that in the moment. It's one of those things that all of a sudden you realize that you have freedom in your body, or you have freedom in your self-expression. Or with the guitar, if I have the discipline to practice every day, I have freedom to play. And commitment is like that too, I think. If you commit fully to some person, instead of have one foot, one out, there's the commitment and discipline are similar in a sense that they can bring a lot of freedom. But to some people, commitment is the opposite of freedom, which it was for me for years. And
Well, you had collapsed the two, right? I remember you telling me you collapsed that they were separate things, like completely opposites of each other, commitment and freedom being the thing. But that I had them be in total battle with each other, that if I committed, I wouldn't be free. And that means committing to a lot of things, like in a relationship, to fully commit to someone. On the other side of that is a lot of depth and a lot of intimacy and a lot of freedom. But to be 1 foot, you might think you want freedom by not committing to a relationship, but it doesn't it creates a different type of freedom. Without depth. There's a depth to the freedom within commitment, and not just in relationships, but also committing to your body, committing to your family, to your art,
committing
to your passion. You commit to your passion, you're completely free, right?
Yes.
Because you're like living lit up in a whole way.
And it's tricky. Most people don't think freedom, they don't think the words discipline and commitment equal freedom, but they actually are. They actually are like a quick hack. I mean, sometimes it's not quick, because sometimes it takes years and years and years to master your discipline, to feel free. But martial artists, I mean, you could really literally go down the list of people that takes discipline to be free.
And then you look at say a beautiful dancer or one of those incredible martial artists that can do things that seem completely impossible, and the adoration and love you feel towards that person because they've mastered something so unique and so spectacular. Like to be that person on the inside must just feel like the ultimate freedom. To have really known that you created something that most people would feel was impossible because of your dedication and your commitment to your passion.
And they were willing to do the hard work. Like it takes hard work to get that feeling of freedom, and to have it's not something you can just luckily wake up and you're like, yay, I'm free. It actually takes work and discipline and commitment to break free into that realm of effortless kind of grace and flow. People that make it look easy, I guarantee you they put in 10,000 hours to make it look that easy. They look free, but they really are disciplined.
Now your life has been a little bit of a commitment to freedom. And I know you're unraveling these new ways of being, but that you've done things like flying planes from a young age, and you've traveled the world. Can you tell us about, I know you've done a documentary called The Highest Pass, and that would have been terrifying for most people, but there would have been an element of, you know, almost risking death to see things that others would be afraid to see. So, like, can you tell us a little bit about some of your wildest experiences of chasing the freedom that you've always had in your life?
Yes, especially on that trip to India. We were on roads, so I did a trip over the highest the highest road on earth that you can take a vehicle, and it was a motorcycle, and there was a group of us. The film is called The Highest Pass. And on my bike, I had taped a picture of my son, who at the time was only 7 or 8. And because I was riding, I had a lot of fear coming up, because felt like you were going head on one way into traffic, like all the time. And death was everywhere. We saw several dead bodies, like 5 or 6.
From road accidents?
Some from roads, some from, there was avalanches, there was car accidents. There's 1 billion people in India. Someone just had a heart attack, someone got in a car accident. So there was a lot of fear coming up in the first week, and you were 10, 12 hours a day alone in your helmet with your thoughts, and the same thoughts were looping. What if I get hurt? Who's going to take care of me if I am paralyzed? Like looping fear. And that whole journey to freedom was replacing that fear with love. So when I would look at the picture of my son on my bike, I would have a loving feeling come over, and it would relax my body, and I would be a much smarter rider. Like I would be more creative in my riding, not rigid and stiff. If I was fearful, I would be stiff and dangerous to myself, because you're not smart. Fear makes you dumb. Love makes you smart. And fear made me ride stupid, and love made me ride really creative and in flow and relaxed. And so that journey over the highest road on earth, it was 19,600 feet on motorcycles, was my journey to my highest self. And it was a quest for freedom, of course. I grew up with motorcycles and airplanes, and my dad was a big adventure seeker and skydiving and everything. So I'm following in my dad's footsteps. But that trip in particular was the journey of replacing fear with love. And
so it was as simple as just looking at that picture and replace, like, or was there anything you could give anyone that maybe deals with a lot of fear in their life as an access point of what you did, or was it just much more of a personal choice on that?
That's a good point, because it was also who I was surrounded myself with. I was surrounded by people who were also on that same journey of living from a place of love and not fear. And we were every day meditating and doing yoga, and our teacher had such a playful, fun spirit. So I stayed right behind his bike. There were 6 motorcycles altogether. And I followed him right behind him, and he was risky rider, but I felt the safest close to him rather than back in the fray, like where it was like anything could happen. At least I knew with following Anand that there was this. So I had a good mentor that I was really related to and had a great connection and humor with. And I think, that it's not just looking at the picture, but it's the feeling and the emotion that was brought about my son that just kind of relaxed my body, So my vision of what my life was and the people I surrounded myself with made a big difference on that as well.
Awesome. And what about flying? I know that was something your father took you on so young. What made you decide to want to get your pilot's license? And then I know you've had some scary situations there too that could have been life or death. What were the things that really, I think God brought you through one of those, didn't Yep. So tell us about.
For sure. Well, there's 14 pilots in my family. So we are an aviation family, and I grew up, my dad would fly home for the weekend where he could have never driven home, so it kept our family close. And at a certain age, like I was in acting and fashion, and my brother was in like welding and doing things that my dad and him could be so related. I wasn't very connected or related to my dad, so I was like, well, I'm going to surprise him and get my pilot's license in New York City. So I got my license, totally surprised my dad. And I did it to establish a close relationship with him. And it worked because we had such a cool thing to talk about. But one time we were flying and I ran out of fuel and I had to land the plane on the ground because we were out of gas, and where we were supposed to land they had torn out the runway and it was just a hill and dirt road, and so I had to land the plane uphill in mud like this. And on the way down I was there with Ange and we were praying, and this miracle that we landed safe, but then also these guys came out and gave us fuel and graded the road and wiped down the leading edge of the wings, went down the hill, took off, and continued on our trip. But it was one of those feelings. But I just remember my dad saying, if you're ever in trouble in your airplane, my dad said, just land the plane. And I just remember hearing his words, land the plane, because your mind can go into panic. And so I've just found a spot and I'm like, well, I'm just going to land the plane right there. And I did, and it made me such a better pilot to have gone through that, like landing on a mine, on a coal mine, uphill in mud, made me confident. And I think that's what some of these trials can do, is once you get through them. And we've learned in relationships too, if we have a breakdown of communication on the other side, there's a deeper relationship and a deeper love once you allow yourself to go through it. And going through a couple times with flying, but I'm grateful to have a father that was such an adventurer and really lived his life with so much play and freedom that
you really embraced.
I had a good example. Yeah.
Now, talking about father-son relationships, you have a particularly special relationship with your son,
Yes.
Oliver. And what would you recommend as an access to freedom of communication with your child, or freedom of play with I guess the most important relationship there is? What would you say is an access to freedom within that relationship?
I feel that with Oliver, my son, that listening to discover instead of listening to respond has been such a powerful access to getting into his world. So I've been raised in a certain way that, with Oliver, I wanted to really discover what he really needs instead of saying, this is the way it is because I said so. I wanted to avoid the kind of rebellion that I was. Like, I rebelled against anybody saying things to me in a certain way. And Oliver has very strong boundaries, and he has his whole life. But learning to not make him wrong and learning to listen to him, to discover his world instead of trying just to respond and to teach and to explain and to be like, I'm the dad and this is the way it is. Really respecting him as a human being has brought a lot of freedom to our relationship, for sure, and playing with him. Like volleyball with him, wrestling with him, taking him to the beach, swimming, like being active, because he's only in the house for a few years and he's going to be in college, So it's that relationship with Oliver is one that is just, I'm willing to learn from him a lot about his relationship with God and the way the world works. And he's got such a beautiful reflection and access of how he sees the world. So not pretending or thinking that my view is the holy father view, that he has to grow up someday to see the world how I do. I'm actually really curious about him and curious about what he needs, and in communication with him where I actually listen to him.